America is suffering from a not so cute sickness. This video is about how America is the new Egypt and the Pharaoh is the missing piece. If you pay attention to this video and understand my points, and you do not concede why I am right, then you may as well throw your children off cliffs. Empathy, love, and righteous indignation are connected. And arguably, it is the temporal lobe which is connected to them the most in the brain. The temporal lobe sits by the temple in front of the occipital lobe. So when you do the wordplay, temper el lobe, the ba, la ba, and o sa put all, le ba, le ba. Okay. So the temporal lobe has the organ of, is associated with the organ of hearing and the sensory area. Now let us look into the Knights Templars. Let's start there to be nice and diplomatic. In the 12th century in Jerusalem, Jah-Ra Salam, Jah-Ra, sun, the reproductive cycle, the O, the sun, lamb. Okay, so the Lord speaking to man and it triggering the sensory area, the senses, and the area that has to do with temperament, right? Righteous indignation, love, etc. And it causes seizures, right? Seizures, seizures. Okay, so going back to the 12th century Jerusalem, the Knights Templars. The Knights Templars were an organization that were designed to guard the Holy Sepulchre and the pilgrims, okay? The Pol Ras and the sepulchre has wordplay to it. Let me get to it right here. Bear with me. The Sa Pol Cur, the sun pole as the cure and the core of the sun and not just the rays. All right, moving on. So they're guarding the trade routes, the pilgrim routes, okay? The roots, all right, like chemistry, the root of the tree. You know, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, perhaps chemist was Atlantis and it floated through the Mediterranean, through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Atlantic Ocean and sank. Perhaps not, but certainly chemistry and science in general have to do with knowledge of good and evil. Speaking of science, why are some genes dominant and some recessive? Think recess, my good people, who are not in denial of the Nile and its significance, sign, significance. Israel is said to be the location of the most battles in history. Remember, Israel. Israel, Lord, and not just the Canaanite God El, Eloi, Elohim, etc. The Jews were Egyptians like the white side of my family that came on the Mayflower is American. Some hundreds of years later, so after 400 years or hundreds of years in Egypt, the Jews are basically Egyptians that left Egypt. Just like after hundreds of years of being in America, the European part of my family are white Americans, are Americans. Who are the warrior race? Which race is the warrior race? The mind, body, and soul. Royal, Ray of El versus Ra, O, El. Okay, we'll get to the Pharaoh and Pharaoh Obi, Pharaoh Obi later. So when we talk about regeneration in the Light War Temple, race mixing and early empirical evidence and empire building related resource reappropriation and the effect on the Nile trade that it has and the lack of the Nigerian volume of people make Nigerians a group of people that have a higher frequency of top martial arts. In other words, East Africans tend to be shorter and less athletic than West Africans, which is possibly another reason why West Africans, over 1.5 million Igbos, came to the Americas through the trade routes, the transatlantic slave trade. And perhaps this is one of the reasons. And when you had all the empires invading Egypt and taking the resources, it made it hard for the Sudanese and the Ethiopians, down to the Somalians, etc., to get what they needed to get their stuff together. So as a result, the Zulus and the Nigerians have some of the most effective martial arts and martial artists. And we'll talk about the Angolans and how they used to appropriate land in a minute. And so the Nigerians have the most people. It's the most populated country in Africa. So logically, we're going to see the highest frequency of martial artists come from that region of the world. Osiris was a martial artist who would perform and do martial arts, stick fighting, etc. during the day, and at night he would think things out. Isis was cunning and a goddess of love and loyalty. Why am I saying this? It goes back to dominant and recessive genes. Who would dominate naturally, right? Who were the dominant people in Egypt? They were the martial artists, who had a long history of martial arts, which is absent in European history. You do not simply have the volume of commonalities in European culture that you have in Egyptian and pervasive African cultures. Notice 1997, we're now in 2018, going on 21 years since I received this trophy. And you can imagine the relevance of my top martial artist challenge, 15 hits in 1.2 to 1.4 seconds, Deontay Wilder's boxing range, with a brain surgeon's son, and the surgeon means leopard in the Kunini culture. The surgeon was called the leopard, rather, and he would circumcise. And of course, Ra cutting off the head of Apep, circumcision, Apep, the primordial waters, the marshes, okay, Chemis, Atlantis, and so on. Moving on. So Osiris would do stick fighting, okay, in Egypt during the day, and he would think things out at night. He would have a nice resting heart rate at nighttime. Okay, and this is also part of regeneration and how some races have more obstacles than others in academics and in school, right? School backwards is looks, okay? And how other races are concerned with their presentation, their demonstration, and how they look, and they sabotage some races. And how some races have a culture of being the victim to the oppressors, and some races come here as immigrants, right? And we'll get into the wordplay of that later. Okay, so German engineering and empire and bodybuilding are connected. The Illuminati, for example, in Bavaria was in Germany. Of course, World War I, World War II, the Kaiser and all this has to do with Germany, and Kaiser Hospital, going back to the physician as the leopard, and the Khan's whore, the falcon, full Khan, Khans, ad fu, Khan fu, take window, taekwondo, empty hand, karate, or carrot E. So when you talk about Prince Reinhard, right? Reinhard of the Netherlands, which is where we get the word sabbat for saboteur. They used to throw the shoes into machines so they could have the edge, or an edge weapon, right? The edge on the competition. So he was a former SS officer. Of course, you have the lightning bolts, which is Min, the patron of chemistry in northern Egypt, by the Nile Delta. Deal to the bull, and not the hawk, right? The dealer, the deck, to deck someone, to punch someone, okay? And he's said to be protected by a military kind of intelligence agency called Cobra. Cobra Commander, Moving on, back to the land appropriation, shall we, with the Kunini, the Simba-Asian culture in southern Angola, and how they were pastoral people and slightly nomadic, but they also became farmers, and they would divvy up the land, and they had certain rituals to award men and women their rightful places. And I have a lot to do. I have to read Isaiah 32, so let me shoot through this now. People landed places. Okay, land appropriation, people who thought bloodshedding was taboo migrated to Biafra. Okay, so when you had places like Angola where people were fighting each other in bloody martial arts competitions, some people decided to migrate to Nigeria. The Igbo, arguably, is the democratic society that stood up for the E's, who went wrong because they stood up for the E's instead of coming together under a pharaoh as an A, when their own culture teaches them about the Igbo Ukwu Empire. And their main god is Chi-Ukwu, right? Chukwu. Okay, the great Chi, the big Igbo Empire, the big Igbo spirit. Okay? Bear with me for a second. So people landed places relative to their philosophy. For example, most of Africa and Israel were killing zones where martial artists reigned and shed blood that was felt in the heavens. It was felt all the way up to the heavens. So Israel, according to historians, is this place where the most battles were fought, major military campaigns, I assume they're referring to. And Africa was basically a bloodbath for a long time. And you see that in the Shaka Zulu series on BBC, how they eventually turned to throwing spears and Igbos turned to wrestling to reduce the bloodshed. And that caused them to go their own way, Igbos southwest and the Zulus to the south. There are three perspectives that people have, 3 degrees, right? The beginner, the fellowship, and the mastery, okay? There is the mainstream lie, the entered apprentice, okay? There is the convenient half-truth to fellowship with your race. And then there is the truth, the master's perspective, who knows best. And if he is consistent with God, he will walk in the light and speak the truth, regardless of whose feelings it hurts and how bad he looks. Think science and technology as racial, class, and intelligence markers based on the history of empires, especially versus martial arts and religion, especially where they overlap. There are elements of contraction, control, and constricting, right? Restricting, versus natural attraction. Okay? Think Iran-Contra, contradiction, right? Contraception, conception. Think generic versus imported and important, right? And of course, America is a land of immigrants, European and otherwise. Then, of course, there is traction that has to do with the terrain, that has genetic and martial arts implication. There's a genetic component to physical attraction and arguably mind, body, soul attraction. So people should not worry about races going extinct so much, or other races taking your women. In my reproductive model, just take a deep breath and reproduce in a way that is consistent with sacred morality, giving everyone their credit, and consider that some races and tribes have less numbers than others. So perhaps they should be allowed to reproduce a little bit more using morality and not a government limit or something. The throne is also a reference to martial arts and deities. Throw down, to throw. And he has thrown his enemies down, cast them out like that bull or ancient serpent, Serapis, Lucifer, the devil, Baal, Zebub. And not Ra, you soar, hero, the arrow. For example, the grace with the wings on it, right? The arrow. Haru, the hawk, the arrow. The spirit, the spear, spirit. The Templars, which include some of my ancestors on my mom's side, were trying to protect the pole rods, the pilgrims, and the Holy Sepulchre. Remember, saw, pole, cure. That's the cure. And the core, not just race. Igbos, because of their lack of unity under a martial arts pharaoh, Pharaoh Obi, Pharaoh Oba, went wrong. You're all right, and you're all wrong. And their answer would be, Bah-ham-bug. We're Buckingham, Nottingham. I'm the sheriff, Nottingham, like little bitches. And of course, the Narmer palette, okay? His neck is at an angle. He had a long neck. He's a tall guy, okay? And he's defeating the northern guys in natural combat. And here are the cattle, the Angolan Kunini cattle, the cattle cults that you see in Zulu culture and so on. They are just not there in Europe. The martial arts culture, the martial arts typical African build. That is my depiction. Here is this depiction. Read Isaiah 32, and it talks about how 32:5, for instance, the vile person shall be no more called liberal, nor the churl shall be bountiful. It talks about reproduction, and it uses the kind of metaphors and the words I use, the thirsty, the water, and so on. So read Isaiah 32. I'll most likely be getting into this into another video. I'm out of time. I was hoping to cover that. For years, I've been telling you, fight for honor and all that is right. Okay? Thank you.